Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Sustainability Spotlight. Today, we're joined by Shernett, who is going to be sharing her personal story about sustainability. So, if I can have you introduce yourself and tell us about your role here at Humber.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shernett Bennett, and I work as a library technician in the archives in the library, which is on the fourth floor of the LRC building. Now, my role is to serve and always about serving and providing information. So, I do service to the students by helping the students with their research. And I also actually help with the archives. And in the archives, it's all about sustainability and preservation of Humber's history because we have a rich source of history here at Humber since its inception in 1967. So what I do, I digitize those material and just to ensure that that material is searchable by everyone who wants a piece of Humber's history.
So, can you share with us your experience with sustainability and how you incorporate sustainability in your day to day life?
I do so many things off campus. For example, I'm into fashion. I love fashion. My clothing, I love to look really good. And in terms of sustainability, I do not go to the big stores to shop. I would call it that I'm a thrift shopper. And I guess that started when I used to manage Value Village thrift store and see the value of those used items. And from there, I decided I would go thrift. So all my fashion was taken from these thrift stores. And also, I would be able to recreate the fashion into what I really want. And that also was unique for me because I didn't find anyone wearing the same clothing that I was wearing because they were unique. Also, off campus, in terms of sustainability, I do a lot of health and wellness sustainability. So I would take long walks by the lake because I live in Hamilton, close to the lake shore there. So I would take long walks there or go right up into the woods in Hamilton and just let out this stress, make a loud sound and let out my stress. And so I use that kind of environment to sustain my health.
Can you share your personal experience with sustainability and what sparked your interest in the topic and why you continue to take initiative?
Okay. And every time that I answer this question, I will always have to go back to Jamaica because that's where I grew up most of my life. And I grew up in a family of 10 siblings and my parents. And I didn't realize it was really sustainability until I became an adult. But what they were doing was very much sustainability because you have so many children. You had to make sure that food was there for them and so on. So my parents were part-time farmers. So basically our food was produced by them in on the farm. That, and when I say farm, is a little backyard gardening thing, but it was enough to provide the food for the family and even to sell a little to others. And my dad would rear chickens and pigs and goats and all those things. So we never had a problem in getting food because my parents were engaged in this. Another thing I would notice is that when my mom, for example, she would cut the yam, she would just take off the head and she would stick it back into the ground and not realizing that this was for longevity, for it to grow and produce again and again. And those were things that I looked at to realize that these are sustainability. Also, as a child, again, being the last child, I had to wear hand-me-downs. And hence my love now for thrift, which I did not even realize until I got to an adult stage. Another interesting thing was toys. We never had toys from the store like some students or some children today. And we used to make our toy out of juice boxes and the cover of bottles. So we would build trucks and cars out of those juice boxes which were used. So rather than it going into the landfill, we would create our own cars and our own trucks. We would drive it around. Another thing, we never had cars at the time. My family never had a family car, but we wanted to go to the woods and get wood to make fire. So my brothers made this thing we call a hand cart, made from waste wood and board that they could have found. That they found somewhere, and then created wheels on that cart and strings and steering, and were able to create transportation for delivery of whatever that they needed to deliver. So it was very interesting. And another important thing which I didn't realize, it was sustainability. For example, when we were going to school and our shoe bottom were falling off, my father would use the tire, so car tires, waste tires. He would cut out the tires and created a shoe bottom for our shoes. So we would have been able to go to school with a shoe. I mean, it was the best looking shoe. But at
it was
least
innovative.
It was innovative.
Yeah.
So when I look back at those things that my parents did for longevity and for survival and sustainability, it makes me now want to just continue in the path, and that's where I got that passion and that drive to now, share with others. And one last thing I want to talk about sustainability is when I used to work with the Jamaica Library Service back home as a librarian. We usually have catalog cards, because we never really had computers at the time. So we had catalog cards, and these were stored in something we call shoe boxes. And there were times that those boxes were falling apart. And I decided I was going to repair those boxes. So I took those same cards that were spoiled and cut it and created this basically this hold on the box side where it was tearing, so that it was firm and it could hold those cards for a long time. And also when it came on to book repairs, because we never had a lot of books, so I would use cartridge paper to, I would say, repair the spine of those books, so students could have those books for a longer time. And these are some of the things I did and did not realize until today that it was for sustainability.
It's really interesting you say that, because like for me as well, growing up, my parents implemented sustainability practices, especially managing food waste, which is something that I continue to do now. I'm glad that you have the same experience, and I'm sure a lot of people watching this will also have like similar experiences and similar stories.
Definitely.
So thank you so much for sharing. You mentioned that you grew up in Jamaica, and it was like sustainability was embedded in your culture and your upbringing. So what are some things that you've, like sustainability related things that you've seen in Jamaica that you don't see here in Canada?
For sure. And as I was mentioning earlier, when you asked me about our culture, about the hand cart, that hand cart is big in Jamaica, especially in the marketplaces, because this is how people transport their goods from the market to the bus stop whenever they would have had to catch a bus or a taxi. And even I find the guys using that hand cart in cases where there's rain or flood, because these cars cannot go through that heavy water, and they use the cart to transport people for a fee across the water, because the cart cannot break down because it doesn't have an engine, right? So that is something which is embedded, which is practiced there, which I don't see in Canada for sure. Another interesting thing is catchment of water, as I was mentioning to you in our little chit chat earlier, that in the rural areas especially, there are houses that do not have piped water or even tank water. So what they do, they create their own water source by adding gutters to their the roof of their houses, and then the water would run off into the tanks and into the drums for that catchment, and then that water would be used to wash, to cook, to drink, after boiling and so on and so forth. So I guess because also of the climatic condition there in Jamaica, it lends itself to that situation because we do not have different seasons like we have here. We're just one big tropical climate. And I think with that, people are able to, live and sustain themselves.
I think a lot of the stuff that you mentioned are like, it's all innovation and it's all things that like people have done for years and continue to do, and lack resources in specific communities. So we have to just be creative and come up with solutions.
Absolutely.
And a lot of the solutions are sustainable.
Another thing which is I think is very critical that I want to mention, because my mom was an unofficial herbalist. So she's not trained to do any herbs, but I would think that is something that she learned over the years from her grandmother and great grandmother, etc., etc. And she would actually go to the bushes or the woods, and she would be able to pick herbs, identify different herbs for different ailments, and she would be able to sell those herbs. So that would be natural things she would have been able to gain from the environment, to sell them to others and encourage others to use it for whatever ailments.
So I think the last question is, I know that sustainability and climate change are really hard topics to talk about, and it can be difficult to have these conversations with your peers. So my question is, are those topics that you bring up among your peers? And if so, how do you approach the conversation?
Absolutely. And that's a good question, because it's hard to convince persons that, the environment is critical and we need it for our future generations. So how I would normally start my conversation, I would say, what do you breathe in? And they say, what do you mean? I say, okay, you breathe in oxygen, right? And what do you give out? And they would say, carbon dioxide. So as I would say, you know what? So if you give out carbon dioxide, what is going to absorb that carbon dioxide? And so we continue that process. So we say the trees, right? So if you clog the earth, then will we have trees? And so that is how I start bringing out that conversation. So I let them see step by step how they are going to impact on the fact that trees would be gone if you clog the earth, and then without the trees, what is going to absorb that waste that we're giving out, and where we're going to get that oxygen. And then they would say, I never quite think about it like that. I usually also talk about when you're stressed and how the sound of the water alone can just relieve that stress. Just close your eyes by the lake and just listen to the sound of the water and how much relaxing and soothing that can be. And those are little things that we talk about. I also talk a little about when you flush things in the drain and it's going to go back to the water source that we're drinking and how that can impact our health. So those are the approaches that I use.
I love that approach, because I feel like sometimes you can get defensive when it's a topic that you're passionate about.
Absolutely.
And when you're defensive, the person that's like on the other end will never understand and will choose to block the information that you're giving them. Thank you so much, and join us for next week's Sustainability Spotlight.